Greetings from the mountains of Colombia. As you can see, we're here in the Andes, about an hour from Bogota. And my name is J Weiskopf. The name of the series is Ayahuasca Express. Although we're going to deal with a lot of other subjects, that is the core of this series. But I start with ayahuasca because I have a certain expertise on that. I've written 2 books about it. I've written a load of articles. I was a pioneer of, among the white men in Colombia, one of the first to go to the jungle. In about 1990, I was in on the start of what I call the urban school. That is a very flourishing school where people drink Yajé. That is the Colombian word for ayahuasca, Yajé. It's important. In Bogota, or the surroundings of Bogota, I myself host sessions here. I am good friends with one shaman. They're called Taiti here. I know a lot of others. We have a candid relationship. I started off very sentimentally, but now we speak man to man, and I'm aware of their problems, they're aware of mine. In other words, I'm not kind of idolizing the shamans the way that the average ayahuasca tourist who goes to Iquitos for 2 weeks does. I'm not criticizing anyone, but I have an in-depth knowledge of their society. I've lived in indigenous communities, and it's important to put ayahuasca also in that context. It's not just a trip, it's the whole expression of a society which in many ways is very endangered, and that is a facet we'll have to talk about. Now, to give an outline of the first few chapters, I want to talk about plants like ayahuasca, like San Pedro, like, forgive me, marijuana, like coca. And the problem here is one of terminology. In other words, they're all plants or plant-based, but from that, are they sacred plants? Are they medicine plants? Are they drugs? Are they narcotics? Are they psychedelics? Are they entheogens? It's very confusing. The terminology is very confusing. But I'd like to start with an account of my progress through these plants, starting where most people have started, with marijuana. Now, my history with marijuana is a bit unusual because you can see my age. And so when I started relatively late, it wasn't until I was living in London, I was already, 25 or older. It wasn't a custom. When I went to high school, it would have been, no one had ever heard of it. When I went to university in New York, no one had ever heard of it. When I went to England, first university, mid-60s, no one. In about 1970, in London, it began to be talked about, but it was still very scarce and hard to get. But anyway, I think the first time was with a girlfriend of mine, a friend who was a girl, not a lover, in Hampstead, next door to the house of Margaret Drabble, as it happens. And it was love at first sight. I just loved for 3 hours non-stop, as happens to many of us. But this is deceptive. This is deceptive. Then occasionally at parties in London, you'd have come across a bit, but it was like 10 people fighting for a roach. So I was never really, a real, what they call here, marihuanero. I couldn't be. It's not as though I wouldn't have been. I couldn't have been. I lived in a hippie commune, and even then, it was scarce. Then I went to Ireland, back to land in rural Ireland, And there it was comical because what they call Irish green is very weak, very scarce. But I already had this lust, this urge, and sometimes this is no exaggeration. We'd hear of another hippie couple. We'd drive 3 hours across Ireland, across 3 counties of Ireland to pretend to visit them, because that was the custom. You know, you'd meet someone and they'd say, well, we have a little country plot in, say in Galway or wherever it was, or in another part of Ireland. We were in County Clare. And you go with the pretext of, your goats, this stone cabin you're rebuilding, very nice, your 9 bean rows, and then sooner or later you get your way around. Hey, do you have a bit of weed? And that was the only reason. That's how desperate I was, but I wasn't addicted. I couldn't have been addicted. And the scarcity made it more attractive. There was a guy in the hills of County Clare who was the big weed king, but we went to him. This is a funny story. I was living with a guy from Ulster who was a hippie, but he was from Ulster, he had an Ulster accent, and he didn't look like a hippie. So we drove up the hills to this Dutch guy, right up at the top of the mountain, who was like the weed king of Munster. Everyone knew him. And so, a nice farm. We looked, he had a beautiful farm. The Dutch are very industrious. And got around to the subject. And of course, he sees this Ulster man who's looking very straight. And he thinks this guy is a cop, which he was sensible in his position. So he said, okay, you're nice guys. I'm not going to sell you any weed. I'll give you a bit. Because it wasn't illegal, so far as I know, technically, to give it to you. So thanks so much. So we took it home and opened it up. And of course it was nothing. It was just the bottom of the barrel, didn't get a stone or anything. So another time, forgive me for these anecdotes of the old doper. They're very boring. It's like the big, the great Levovsky, all these corny stories. The young people must find them incredibly tiresome. But I'm getting to the point. Slowly getting to the point, working my way from marijuana to ayahuasca and other plants.